Imagine London, summer of 1887. The whole city is just buzzing, almost shimmering, with Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee celebrations.
Oh, absolutely. You got this huge service at Westminster Abbey, state banquets, a massive military review.
A children's party in Hyde Park, thousands of kids, Punch and Judy performing animals, balloons, lemonade, cake. Just endless celebration.
And garden parties, balls, royalty from all over the world, everyone decked out in, silks and jewels, pure opulence.
Right. But at that exact same time, literally just a short walk away, you had hundreds of people sleeping rough on the stone benches in Trafalgar Square.
Nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And these weren't necessarily people who'd always been destitute. We hear about like an elderly musical director and his wife, respectable once, now too ashamed for the workhouse.
And Trafalgar Square itself, sitting right there on that fault line between the wealthy West End and the struggling East, it became this magnet for political voices.
People like William Morris, Eleanor Marx, holding meetings, protests,
right,
often ending in clashes with the police. It just laid bare that huge divide.
That contrast, it's so stark, isn't it? The glittering jubilee and then that desperation, it really shows why understanding history, especially tricky periods like this Victorian era, needs more than just the headlines.
Exactly. You can't just focus on the sparkle. We have to challenge our assumptions, look a bit deeper.
You really do. It's not enough to just see the surface.
And that whole idea of looking deeper, reflecting, and thinking critically about what you encounter, history, current events, anything really that's crucial, it's sort of central to how we approach this deep dive.
It's also really the driving force behind our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments. We use AI analysis there to help you, the listener, really get into books, unpack them, and sharpen those critical thinking muscles. It's all about getting beneath the surface level.
Absolutely. So let's do that now. Let's step away from the Jubilee glitter for a moment and look at the reality for those on the margins. What was daily life actually like?
Well, for a huge number of people, it meant ending up in common lodging houses. These were like the absolute bottom rung, shelter for the too poor for anything else.
And these places were, well, pretty grim. They housed everyone, beggars, petty criminals, sex workers, alcoholics, the unemployed, the sick, the old casual laborers, often people ticking multiple boxes there.
Whitechapel was notorious for them. Something like 233 houses packed with maybe 8,500 homeless people.
Yeah. Streets like Dorset Street, Thrall Street, Flower, and Dean Street became infamous. Conditions inside were just awful. 4 pence got you a hard bed, probably flea-ridden in a packed, stinking dormitory.
Maybe 8 pence for a slightly more private cabin, just thin wooden walls, really.
The only real communal space was the kitchen. People huddled there, cooked whatever scraps they had, drank weak tea or beer. Social investigators who went in were just shocked.
What did they report seeing?
Oh, just terrible manners, horrific language, even from tiny children, constant violence, unbelievable filth, overflowing toilets, people openly naked, sex happening publicly, drunkenness, appalling child neglect. One person called it the worst of the slum concentrated.
Wow. It paints a picture of utter despair.
It really does. And if you couldn't scrape together even 4 pence, or as an alternative sometimes, there was the workhouse system, particularly the casual wards known as the Spike.
And the Spike wasn't about helping people, was it?
Not at all. It was explicitly designed to discourage people from being homeless or wandering. It was meant to humiliate you into finding work or staying put, not offer any real comfort.
How did they humiliate people? What was the process?
Well, the minute you went in, your family was split up. Men, women, children over 7, all separated. Then they took your clothes, everything you owned.
Everything.
Everything. Forced you into a communal bath, often with dirty water used by others before you. Then you got this rough, badly fitting uniform, instantly dehumanizing.
So you lost your identity, your family, your dignity right off the bat.
Precisely. And for that privilege, a starvation diet. Watery gruel, they called it skilly. There were reports, even late in the 1880s, of things like rat droppings found in it. Poor quality bread, maybe some cheese or potatoes. Meat was a rarity.
And you had to work for this.
Oh, yes. Hard, tedious labor. Picking oakum was common, endlessly teasing apart old tarred ropes, agony on the fingers, or breaking stones, scrubbing floors, whatever task they said. And if the master thought you weren't working hard enough, they could keep you longer.
No wonder people preferred sleeping on the street.
Exactly. That life of tramping, moving between casual wards, cheap lodging houses, maybe sleeping rough, it wasn't a choice. It was a constant, desperate calculation to avoid the total control and sheer misery of a longer stay in the workhouse. London was full of people sleeping rough, a reality easily ignored during the Jubilee festivities.
It's so easy, isn't it, looking back or even from the comfort of 1887 to just see this mass of the poor. But the book we're looking at today does something really important. It zooms in, it shows us the individuals.
Right. It reveals their backgrounds, the times things were okay, their resilience, and the specific events, the tragedies, the circumstances that led them to that point.
And when you see their individual stories, it just changes everything. Take Polly Nichols. Before her life went downhill, she wasn't born into abject poverty. She had a pretty stable childhood, actually.
Learned skills like housekeeping, cooking, and she had prolonged schooling, apparently, into her teens. That was more than many working-class girls got back then. Her father had a steady job, too.
She married William Nichols, who had a good, respectable job at a big printing firm, William Claus and Sons. They even printed Dickens.
Yeah, a reputable place. And his job meant they could get housing in the Peabody buildings, which were seen as quite respectable.
But getting in wasn't easy, was it?
No, the Peabody Trust checked residents' morals. William needed his employer to vouch for him. But the rules inside were incredibly strict. And crucially, if a couple separated, they often got kicked out. Polly made a really bold move, leaving William in 1880.
That must have had massive consequences for her.
Huge. Instantly lost her respectable status, judged incredibly harshly as a failed woman, and earning a living wage on her own back then. Almost impossible for a woman doing traditional work.
And the law offered no way out.
Basically none. Divorce laws were completely stacked against women. She couldn't divorce William just for having an affair, if he even did. She'd need adultery plus something like cruelty or desertion. He only needed to prove adultery. She was legally stuck.
Her drinking became an issue later, and her father eventually couldn't keep her at his home. And then when she died, the police and the press just immediately labeled her a prostitute.
Yes, and that assumption just instantly shaped all the theories. Was it a gang targeting prostitutes? A lone killer focused on them? This was despite her own father saying she wasn't like that, didn't stay out late. Her husband said she lived with other men after they split, sure, but he never used the word prostitute.
But the label stuck.
It did. Maybe it was just easier for people to grasp, but it wasn't the full story, not by a long shot.
And that quote from her husband William at the mortuary, it's so powerful. Seeing her, he said, "I forgive you as you are on account of what you have been to me." That says so much about her, about their past, beyond the label.
Now think about Annie Chapman. She was born illegitimately, yes. Her mother was called a dolly mom, kind of an amateur prostitute, and her father was a soldier turned valet. But Annie got a superior education at the regimental school. Reading, writing, maths, needlework, she had skills.
But her childhood was filled with tragedy too, wasn't it?
Immense tragedy. Siblings dying from scarlet fever, typhus. And her father later died by suicide. Awful.
It was her marriage to John Chapman that brought stability.
For a while, yes.
Yeah.
And relative wealth, actually. He was a private coachman, which was a high-status servant job. Worked for a wealthy industrialist, Francis Tress Berry, on this huge estate near Windsor Castle.
Sounds like a completely different world.
It was. 627 acres, views of the castle, modern mansion, dozens of staff. John managed the stables, the accounts. They had their own comfortable coachman's house parlor, living room, bedrooms.
But things changed.
It seems the death of their young daughter, Annie Georgina, aged just 8, was a massive blow. Annie really struggled with alcoholism after that. Described as a sad, sullen, quiet drunk, weighed down by heartache. Her sisters were worried, even got her into a sanatorium briefly.
And that walk she did, incredible.
25 miles. On foot, in winter, to Windsor to find her husband when his maintenance payments stopped because he was ill. She even had to use a casual ward, the Spike, for shelter on the way and do the oakum picking.
And again, like Polly, her drinking meant society just lumped her in. Degenerate, probably a prostitute, that easy judgment.
And then there's Elizabeth Stride. Different background again. Rural Sweden, farmer's daughter, conservative Lutheran upbringing, basic schooling focused on the Bible.
She contracted syphilis early on, right?
Seems likely, yes. Possibly from the father of a child she had. And she ended up in this venereal disease hospital, the Kuhhuset in Gothenburg, which sounds horrific. Prison-like shared beds, force allowed against patients.
She came to London, worked in domestic service initially.
Yes, quite a prestigious position near Hyde Park. But even there, the rules were suffocating, like having to turn and face the wall if the family walked past you.
She later ran a coffee shop with her husband.
John Stride, a carpenter.
Yeah.
But it seems they struggled financially, and because of her syphilis, she likely couldn't carry children to term. Huge stigma around that. And women were often blamed unfairly for bringing the disease into a marriage.
And in Whitechapel, she became quite secretive.
Very. Lied about her name, her age, scammed someone called Mary Malcolm, made up stories like surviving the Princess Alice steamboat disaster, having a baby girl.
Why do you think she did that?
Maybe coping mechanisms, ways to survive, to navigate that incredibly tough life. What's striking is how little people who knew her in Whitechapel actually knew about her real past. Only someone like Sven Olsen, the clerk at the Swedish church who had records, knew her true history. She was very isolated.
And after her death, same story.
Pretty much. Police, newspapers, just another unfortunate. Little interest in who she really was, her life before London, her struggles.
And finally, Kate Eddowes. She seems to have had a particularly rough start.
Really tough.
Yeah.
Large family. Her mother died young 42 from consumption after having so many children. Father died too. Kate was sent off to live with an aunt and uncle in Wolverhampton.
And worked in a tin plate factory.
Yeah, which sounds awful. Scouring metal, acid vats, long hours, dangerous. Her aunt and uncle thought it was a decent, steady job, but her sisters had hoped she'd go into domestic service, something seen as more respectable. A difference in outlook even then. Then she got involved with Tom Conway. Her uncle, a pugilist, a boxer. She was apparently infatuated with him. It seems he was abusive. She left home with him and became a chaunter.
A street performer.
Basically, yeah. Singing ballads on the street. It probably suited her personality. She was known for being quite outgoing and lively.
Yeah.
But it was a brutal life. Conway's abuse, her own drinking problems.
Cycles of workhouse and casual ward stays, often with her children. And a split from her sisters.
A really sad rift with Emma and Harriet. Later, she was with John Kelly. They tried hot-picking down in Kent, common seasonal work for the poor, but it didn't work out. They came back destitute.
There's that story about pawning boots.
Yeah, Kate pawned hers while John is apparently barefoot. Shows how desperate they were. And John's account of their movements on the night she died was described as muddled up, suggesting he'd likely been drinking too.
And the details of her last hours. Arrested for being drunk.
The jailer apparently taunted her, saying she deserved a beating. She lied about her name and address to the police, maybe just out of sheer contempt for authority after everything she'd been through.
And the items in her pockets.
Just heartbreakingly ordinary. Soap, a comb, a knife, a spoon, little tin boxes of tea and sugar, a thimble, some rags, pipes, pawn tickets, the everyday tools and tiny comforts of a transient life. Maybe those tin boxes even reminded her of the tin factory work.
The book paints this picture of her in Mitre Square, with those few possessions, her heart sodden with injury, just waiting for the police to move her on again.
When you put all these stories together, these deeply human, complex lives, it becomes impossible to just accept that simplistic label.
We absolutely have to challenge that claim that's repeated endlessly. Jack the Ripper was a killer of prostitutes.
This book just demolishes that idea. It shows the label is arbitrary. It wasn't supported by their full histories. Even the authorities struggled with the definition. Sir Charles Warren, the police commissioner, had told his men they needed proof of solicitation or a conviction. But constables often just applied the label based on where a woman lived or how she looked. Prejudice, basically.
And reducing them to that single word, prostitutes. It served a purpose, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Back then it was convenient. It reinforced Victorian morals about fallen women, and sadly, it continues today. It feeds the whole Ripper industry, the mythology of this shadowy figure targeting a specific type. And in doing that, the actual women, Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Kate, they vanish. They become footnotes to his story, not people with their own stories, their own families, histories that stretch back years, hopes that were crushed by tragedy, poverty, and systemic unfairness.
The book makes it absolutely clear. These women were so much more than that label. They had worked different jobs: servant, factory worker, street performer, coffee shop owner, coachman's wife.
They had moments of stability, families they loved. They faced terrible personal losses, grinding poverty, abuse, laws that were totally unfair to them, and this crushing weight of societal judgment that just narrowed all their options.
And this isn't just about getting the history right, is it?
No, not at all. It's really a call to action for us, for you, the listener, right now. It's a challenge to look past those easy labels and stereotypes, whether we're looking at the past or people around us today. Understanding individuals means making the effort to see beyond the surface judgment.
Learning the real complex stories behind people who've been reduced to a simple, often inaccurate label. It's incredibly powerful. It doesn't just change how we see the past. It makes us better critical thinkers about the narratives we hear constantly today.
And that kind of critical engagement with complex ideas from books, that's exactly what we try to foster in all our deep dives and also in our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments.
So if this exploration of these women's real lives resonated with you, please do subscribe to the show so you catch our future deep dives. And maybe share it with someone else you know who appreciates challenging assumptions and hearing the stories that often get missed. You can find a link to the book we've been discussing in the show notes.
And most importantly, please keep thinking critically. Question the stories you're told. Question the labels you encounter.
Because it is frighteningly easy for societal judgment or just a simple repeated story to completely erase the full humanity of individuals. That was true then, and it's true now. Seeking out the messy, nuanced, complex reality, that's always worthwhile.